And here we are inside of the Microbit classroom. And you can find this as well at classroom.microbit.org. To get started, we're going to name our activity. I'm going to call this one Breath because the app that we'll be making today is a meditative breathing program that our students can use to practice their mindful breathing. And we're going to choose our programming language as well. I'm going to go ahead and choose MakeCode because that is the one that my students are the most familiar with and the most comfortable with. And from here, we're just going to click Launch Classroom to get started. And so now what we have here is a few different ways of interacting and getting started inside of the Microbit classroom. We have our editor, which is where you can actually go ahead and build the programs. And you'll see when I click on editor, it actually opens up MakeCode. It looks very similar to it. All of the blocks that we're familiar with are there. Our emulator is there, the debugger, our download button, even the ability to switch between blocks and JavaScript, which is really great if you have students who are ready to maybe move forward and start learning how to use JavaScript instead of blocks. So all I'm doing right now is I'm bringing out a few blocks that my students will need to use for their program. So a couple of different options here. You could go ahead and build the entire program for your students for them to use, or what I like to do is just bring out the pieces that they are going to need and let them work at figuring out how many of those blocks they'll need and how they fit together. Now, if something is very new to your students, obviously you want to give them a little bit of help in the right direction. Now, I've brought out a loop block, and loops are new to my students. We haven't done a lot of work with them yet. So a great tip for offering them a little bit of support while they're working independently is to use the commenting option inside of your blocks. So when I right click on this loop block, I have a button here to add a comment. And by adding a comment, I can add in a little bit of information to help my students along. So I'm just going to let them know that they need to change the number to change how many times it repeats. And that's something that they'll be able to find when they go and start using this program and you start building with the blocks as well. So this is pretty good. These are the blocks that my students are going to need. They'll be able to duplicate and change the icons and the LEDs and the amount of time where the pause is and put all that together. So my next step is to go and get my students logged on to the classroom. And we're going to do that with the dashboard. So when we come over to the dashboard, we can see that we have our link to go and join, microbit.org/join. So that is the website that your students are going to go to and get logged in. Now, this is a great thing to just leave up maybe for a few minutes so that everybody can get themselves in. We are going to also take a look at what does this look like on the students' side as well. So I'm going to bring over a students tab here, and we'll be able to take a peek at that. So this is what your students will get to see when they are ready to log in. So the first things they'll need is they'll need to make sure that this information here matches the information that we displayed from dashboard. So pink, lion, fire engine, stopwatch. And they'll also need to put that pin in. Again, you can leave all this information up for them so they can take their time in getting logged in and getting settled. Or you may just want to copy all this and put it somewhere handy for them, maybe on the board or somewhere else in your classroom that's handy. So the student is now going to click continue. And now they get to put their name in. So I'm going to use my student Ada's name here. And she's just going to hit continue. And now you can see she is inside of MakeCode, and I haven't sent her any code yet. She could start building something of her own here, and that would be fantastic. Maybe she's going to just sort of mess around with a few options here, maybe play around while she's getting everything ready, or she's waiting for me. She just made her little flashing heart app, which is fantastic. Now, for me on my side, let's go and take a peek at what I get to do. So now that I've got Ada logged in, I can actually click on her name and I can go and look at what she is up to. And I can see that little app that she made. So if you wanted your students to just have some time and be creative, they can do that as well. Another thing that I can do, going back into our dashboard, is I can click on this little box with the pencil right beside it. And I can change Ada's name. Maybe I have multiple Adas in my class and I want to give their initial there so I know who's who. I can also toggle her from in progress to finish. So if I felt like what she just made there was appropriate for the day, I could toggle her to finished and she would be done for the day. But for now, I'll keep her as in progress. I can also delete her from the classroom. So maybe it's time for her to sign off for the day. Maybe she's leaving early. I can remove her from the classroom and we'll start again the next day. So I'm going to click apply changes because I've added her initial in there and you can see it updates right there. So now that Ada's logged in, I want her to get started with the code that I actually created for her. So let's go over to editor and let's get this code out to her as the assignment. So to do that, all I'm going to do is click share code with students right here in the right corner. And there I can see Ada in my list. If I had more students signed in, I would see all of them here. But for right now, we're just going to be sending it out to all students. So let's send her the code. And now I can go and look at Ada's work. So let's take a peek at what happened to Ada's screen when I clicked that button. So here's Ada's screen, and she got a notice saying your teacher has sent you some code, and she's going to go ahead and click use code. So you can see the moment that I did that, the one that she was working on disappeared. So if your students were working on something prior to you sending them their code, just make sure that they download the hex file or upload it onto their microbit before they need to move on. That way they can use that file later on if they've downloaded the hex file somewhere safe for them to use later on. But it does reset everything, and you can see that my blocks are there now. It overrides what your students were doing prior. But you can see that my comment I left is there so that there is a little bit of help with what do I do with this loop block. And she can begin working on putting in whatever it is that she's going to make with her meditative breathing app by dragging the blocks over, duplicating the ones that she needs multiples of, changing the pause on them, changing the icon, and just really being creative and going and building on their own. And the nice thing about this is that as she is working here, I can come over and let's look back at the teacher view to see what happens. So on the teacher view, I'm actually going to click on student code because that's where I get to see my students' work. And I can see here that Ada has been working. And the neat thing here is that as she is working, I get to see those updates happen live. So you'll see she's actually working right now in the background, and you can see, oh, she just duplicated that block and she's bringing this block in. She's changing things, and it's really cool to sort of watch them work live. Now, you might be asking, well, what happens if a student arrives late? What if they maybe missed the first part of class? Well, let's go ahead and see what happens in that situation. So in this situation, I'm going to have another student log in using this information. The nice thing is that this login information does not change. It's still going to be the same one until I change the lesson. And so I'm getting another student to log on here, and I'll be able to see them pop up. So here's Ian. Ian has just joined class, and maybe he needs to play a little catch up. If I click on his name, you're going to see that there is nothing there for him to work on. Uh-oh. So as a teacher, I come back to my editor. I click share code with students. And this time, instead of all students, I'm going to uncheck this box and I'm going to click on Ian's name and send the code only to him. And so now if I go back over to my student code and I can take a peek, there's Ada's work. And if I click on Ian, there's the code that I just sent him so he can get started. The other neat thing that we can do here is if I click on Ada, for example, Ada's been doing really well and I need Ian to catch up, or maybe they're partners on a project and they want to help each other out. So Ada has given me permission to give her code to Ian to help him get started. So to do that, all I have to do is make sure I've clicked on Ada's name in my student list and click Share Student Code. And what this is going to do is it's going to share what Ada has made with Ian. So I'll click Share Student Code. I find Ian's name in my list, and I click Send Code. And now if I look over at Ian's work, it's going to have updated and it looks identical to Ada's, which is really cool. And so now he can get started. It doesn't change Ada's code at all. What he does with it is not going to impact her code, and they can just continue to work as they need. So maybe we've come down to the end of class. Well, there's a couple of things that we can do. We can come straight over to Save Classroom, and we can download the HTML file. And that's where we can actually pick up and resume this activity from where everyone left off another day. We can also click End Session and just end the whole lesson altogether, and that's going to kick all the students out of the classroom. The other wonderful thing we can do is we can actually download an entire report from Word of our students' work. And I'll show you what that looks like. I have an example I'm going to bring over here. So this is a report from another class that I did, and you can see the names of the students, how many there were that day, the day of the lesson we did, whether or not they were present for the session, and what they did for their work. So if work was submitted or if they're still in progress, if they're still working on something. I can also scroll down and see my code that I made. And if I scroll down further, I can actually go and see what each of my students individually did that day with their program. Some of them didn't get much done. Some of them got some really cool work done. But this is all wonderful data that I get to keep, and I can save this to my computer, or I can print it off and maybe put it into a file somewhere, maybe a cumulative file, wherever I want to use it. The other wonderful thing here that you might notice is this student feeling. So what happens when a student finishes their work is they get to give you a little feedback about how they felt about the lesson. So let's actually take a peek at what that looks like. I'm going to bring Ian's work over this time. And I can see that, Ian's gotten a little bit of work done, but maybe he's done for the day. And that's okay. So Ian's going to click I've finished. And he gets a little pop-up asking him how he felt about the lesson. Now, maybe he started out class feeling kind of rushed because he wasn't there on time, but he's feeling good now because he got to work with a friend. So he's going to give us a little smiley face, and he's done. He can go ahead and sign out. And then he can log off his computer, and he's done for the day. And the same thing for Ada. She can come over here and say that she's finished, and she's feeling really great. So she's going to give a big happy smiley face, and she can sign out too. And for me, I can see now that my students have finished, and I can change that if I want to. Maybe I looked at their code and said we're not quite done yet. I can actually click on this little icon here, and I can toggle them back to in progress. And let's say all of our students are finished for the day. They can go ahead and I can just click end session, and that will end the class for everybody. I won't worry about downloading the HTML file because we are done with the lesson. So I click end session without downloading file. And we're back to where we began. And that's how we use the Microbit Classroom.